I probably stayed put for too long because I felt like I was scared. I should deliver babies. I have 8 years of postgraduate training. I should do surgery. I stopped doing those things 4 years after training.
Hi, friend. Welcome to the Big 4-0. I'm Stephanie McLaughlin. This is the place where we talk about a midlife turning point no one warned you about. The very normal, often messy, always meaningful experience of transition sometime around age 40. For many of us, it's the first time we realize the life we built in our 20s and 30s doesn't quite fit anymore. The job, relationships, even the goals we once chased just start to feel off. I know that feeling well. I fought against it hard and honestly made the whole thing messier than it had to be. On this show, we talk about what happens next, how people navigate change, redefine success, and build lives that actually feel like their own. I share stories and conversations that help you make sense of what might be shifting in your life and remind you that you're not the only one figuring it out. And when the conversation wraps, I'll take a few minutes to connect what we've just heard to some of the bigger themes and patterns that show up in this turning 40 transition. So don't rush off when the interview ends. Today, my guest is Dr. Polly Watson, an OB-GYN who realized in her mid-30s that doing everything right in medicine wasn't the same as practicing medicine right. And she spent the next decade finding a path that felt better. Hi, Polly. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here.
It's so good to have you. We are going to talk about one of my favorite subjects today. This is something that is very close to my heart, so I'm very excited to jump into your story. I'm not going to give anything away to begin with. Why don't we just start at the beginning and tell me a little bit about the forces that shaped you into the person you were when our story begins in your mid-30s? How'd you become that person?
So I'm an OB-GYN, and I really was moved to seek this kind of medicine because my mom went through early menopause and she really got abysmal medical care.
Yeah.
And she went through menopause at 38. And so people were like, this just doesn't happen.
How old were you at the time? How old were
I was,
you?
let's see, I was born when my mom was 25. So I was like in middle school. Like my
Oh,
mom
wow.
was, I was in middle school. I had the fortune of going to a small private school called Paideia School in Atlanta. I had a lot. I was surrounded by amazing teachers. I was going to lectures at Emory in science when I was in high school. I was surrounded by people who were like, hey, cool, you're into this. Let's go figure it out. I think that sounds a little bit weird, but I love Paideia School. I was grateful, really grateful to go there. So when I was 35, so just in case people don't know, 18 to 22 was undergrad, 22 to 26 is medical school, 26 to 30 is residency. So you're like starting your career at 30, where the rest of your friends have been working for a decade. So it's a long, arduous, insane process. And 35, I had been practicing as an OB-GYN for several years and really was struggling with practicing medicine how I wanted to, and also trying to figure out how to be a mom in there. So couldn't get pregnant, finally got pregnant, lost a baby, got pregnant again. That baby was twins, and then one of the babies stuck and one of the babies didn't stick. And then a lot was happening in medicine, right? So I'm 51 now. So I'm one of the doctors that
20
started
years
with
ago is like Y2K, right? I'm trying
medicine
to.
was on paper. When I started off, you used to be able to shout down the hall and say, hey, Carol, I need a urine in room 6. And then the electronic health record happened. And then doctors were taking 2 hours of work home a night, clicking boxes for insurance companies. You couldn't yell to Carol, hey, I need a urine in room 6. You had to click all the boxes to make sure it happened. And then she looked on her computer and everything became very robotic. It was a time to start having some kind of, I did all this education. Did I do the right thing? Am I really showing up at work how I want to show up? I remember meeting with someone in coding really early in my career, and she was fussing at me because I didn't list the diagnosis codes in the right order. And I'm like,
Yeah.
who am I working for here? I'm
Right.
working for the insurance company. I'm not working for the patient.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Wow.
so that was 35. I was a brand new mom. I had my first baby at 38. 32, almost 33, my second baby at 34, almost 35. That was like, whoa. Being a mom is the hardest job ever, right? It's the greatest job ever, but it's the hardest job ever. It's like showing up every day for a test that you didn't get to study for. That's how I feel about being a parent,
Wow. Well
even
said.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was 35, I had 2 little kids. I was not getting a lot of sleep. I was still kind of figuring out, how do I be a physician that I'm proud of being in this climate of clicking the boxes for insurance companies? That's where I was at 35.
Yeah. One of the things I hear so often in these conversations is that one of the big pieces of this transition is the idea of fulfillment in your professional life. And for you, it's a little different, right? Because you spend so much time in school, whereas for a lot of us, we started working in our early 20s. So you're checking boxes and you're following the path and you're climbing the ladders. And I think you were doing the same thing just inside the educational structure, right?
Right.
You were just following the next step and the next step and the next step. And then often I hear that people pick their heads up in their mid-30s and say, like, wait a minute, is this what I meant to do? This isn't exactly what I thought it would be. And this isn't as fulfilling as I want it to be. And that then becomes important to us. Did you feel some of that same stuff?
I think you do pick your head up career-wise. Hey, medical world is changing. I'm now an insurance clerk, right? I'm an insurance clerk instead of a clinician. And then you throw motherhood into it, right? So then that becomes this really, again, I grew up in the 90s where it was like, you can do it all. Well, guess what? There's only 24 hours in the day, and there's a limit to how much sleep we need and all the things we need to take care of ourselves as humans. And so that was a lie. You can't do it all. Where am I with being a physician and serving women and showing up in the way that I would have wanted someone to show up for my mom? And
Yeah.
then how do I show up as a parent? I don't know. I just want to say this. There's this whole like Cinderella narrative on being a mother. And I wanted so badly to have babies. I love babies. I was so excited about being a mother. It was so bewildering. It was so unbelievably hard. I still look back on those early years and think, I do not know how to breastfeed on demand and have a sleep schedule. I think those 2 things are incompatible. It was just such an overwhelmingly hard time because at work, there was a lot of uncertainty. And then at home, how do you be the parent you want to be while you're juggling all these other things? And then all these little creatures, you don't know who you're going to get. I got somebody who didn't like to sleep very much. It wasn't until the second baby when I had enough courage to say, "You know what? I'm just gonna put him in bed with me and we're gonna get some rest." And that was a lot easier.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the people you were seeing in your practice, the women that you were seeing in your practice. Because one of the things that was also happening in this time of huge change in the medical field was that the internet was exploding, and we were
Mhm.
all figuring out that the internet was going to become much more central in our lives. And many of us started turning to Dr. Google. Talk a little bit about professionally the people that were coming in and the things you were hearing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to bring up because that kind of helps me go to the next chapter, right? The thing that stands out in my mind, if we take a step back, is the pattern that sort of inspired me to go into medicine was that my mom wasn't heard. She wasn't taken seriously. That doesn't exist. What you're telling me you're experiencing, you're not experiencing, like this complete shutdown. And when women were going to Dr. Google, they would come in and they would say, I think I have adrenal fatigue. Okay. And I'm like, "What the hell is that?
Mm.
What is that? I don't know what that is." No one had taught me what that was. And so then I was at Menopause Society sometime around there. This was at least 10 or 12 years ago, where when you had a question, you would walk up to a microphone. You didn't use an app. And so I'm sitting around and I'm like, "Are your patients asking about this? What is this adrenal? What are they talking about?" So one of us stood up and walked up to the microphone and asked, and it was the exact same shutdown. That's not a real thing. That doesn't exist. Go back to your seat kind of tone.
And can we just pause for a moment and tell me who answered the question?
Oh, I finally got the question answered when I started learning about integrated and functional medicine.
But what I meant
Oh.
was a man answered that question.
Oh, right, right, right. Yes,
A
yes, yes.
man said, "That doesn't exist. You're making this up. It's all in your head.
Right.
Go sit down."
And we understand now that if we were going to use more specific language, we might call it hypothalamic pituitary adrenal insufficiency. We might use different words, but I think getting caught up in semantics is not helpful for women who are struggling with energy, focus, sleep disruption, all those things, right?
Mm.
Women were coming in, the internet was happening. They were saying, "Hey, I think I've got these things." The other thing that was happening is they were coming in with garbage bags full of supplements, and they expected me to know what they were taking and how it interacted with their medicine, and I wasn't trained in that at all in
Yeah.
conventional medicine, like 0.
Yeah.
Then I would leave and go get on Google as fast as I could and try to figure out if I could find anything. One of the big pushes for me was that I needed to find answers to questions that I was not able to answer for my patients. I started in some integrated medicine spaces. Eventually, I found functional medicine. And I think the big shift was from working with a lot of physicians who are exhausted and burned out, right? They're taking 2 to 3 hours of work home a night that they're not getting paid to do to click boxes for an insurance company, and they have 12 minutes to see a patient. We're not shutting these people down. They're working in impossible conditions.
Yeah.
Then I went to AIHM out in California, and the meeting, we got to have lunch outside.
Yeah.
And you got to sit on bouncy balls, and we had breaks, and the food was really healthy. You would have a yoga as part of the conference. It was just a complete shift, and the people were happy. But if you ask a question and someone didn't know the answer, it was met with curiosity and interest
Yes.
rather than shutting it down.
Judgment and arrogance. Oh, sorry. Did that come out? Was that out loud? So, the reason that I said at the beginning that this was a subject that was near and dear to my heart is that for almost the last decade, I have managed chronic illness, a handful of chronic illnesses that have been vague and difficult to get a handle on. And they have proven to be very resistant to treatments. And not a single person with an MD behind their name has really been able to help me because my issues are not localized to a single system or a
Right,
single organ or a single piece of the body.
right,
And so that zoom out, more systemic look, more understanding some of the larger forces that affect everything is something that I have had to go to naturopathic and integrative and functional kind of medical people to even take me seriously. So that's why when you and I first met, I was like, oh, yeah, let's talk about this.
it's so sad because you're right. Medical training and specialization is putting systems in silos as if
Hmm.
they're separate. And we
Yep.
know that they're not separate. We've got a gut brain connection, we've got a gut immune connection. It's all connected, right?
Right.
And then you can't probably do it in 7 to 12 minutes either when you're
Right.
right dealing with chronic, long term, complex illness.
Yeah. So now let's layer on top of all of this. You come into your late 30s and you started experiencing your own hormonal changes.
Yeah, that was interesting. On one hand, I guess I was 39 and I'm sweating through the sheets. I'm like, okay, mom had menopause at 38. I'm 39. This is what's happening. I went to my gynecologist, who's fabulous. And
Mhm.
I said, hey, these are my symptoms. This is my family history. This is what I think's going on. Can I go ahead and get started on some hormones? I'm pretty miserable. And I just want to emphasize to all the women that are out there, as a professional woman, the neurocognitive changes with hormone fluctuation are freaking no joke. It's not just hot flashes and night sweats. Like there are a myriad of menopause symptoms, but I remember that I couldn't come up with a name of drugs that I prescribed all the time,
Hmm.
to the point that I would literally have to be like, it was back in the day when you were bopping in and out of exam rooms all the time and you'd do one little thing and then you'd bop out and I'd bop out and I'd have to go Google what's the yeast medicine called? And I'm like, it was so bad.
Diflucan.
It was just so bad. I'm so grateful that my doctor was like, okay, it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck. I don't even, maybe she did check my hormones. I think my estrogen was 20. I was also so unbelievably tired
Yeah.
and just like pregnancy level tired, so unbelievably tired. That was helpful. I think there was more to what was going on at that time than just
Yeah.
early menopause. But I'm so grateful that I was able to get adequate medical care because, like, starting with hormone deprivation that early in terms of cardiovascular health, brain health, bone health. Sorry, I'm like switching into doctor
Yeah.
mode and I'm not
I
supposed to do that, but
It's okay.
it really matters for your overall health. So I'm so grateful that I was able to get that support because I also think as a parent, being that short fused with little kids, I needed some help. So it was really
Yeah.
great that I got some.
Do you remember how you first came across remind me, AIHM, it's the Academy of
And
Integrated.
holistic medicine. So it's
Okay.
Mimi Girardi is the head of that organization, and they're out in California, and they were great.
As a conventional OB-GYN MD, and you're starting to feel those sort of grumblings of this isn't fitting, this isn't quite right, this isn't what I'm intended to be doing.
Right.
How did you find the alternative? Where did you come across it? I'm totally projecting here. I'm just going to admit that right out. I'm guessing that these alternative medical organizations are really poo pooed
Mm.
in the rooms and the buildings that you were in. So, where'd you find it and how'd you start following that thread?
I don't remember if my friend Harriet brought it to me or if I brought it to Harriet. So I have
Mm.
no idea. There was another physician in the group that I was working with, and we were both trying to answer some of these questions together. It first started off as women are bringing in these substances. I didn't know what quercetin was, right?
Mm.
I had no freaking clue. No one taught me about this stuff. It was a conference on supplements, basically like how do you pick a supplement? What are these things for? And at that conference, oh dear. Let's see. I'm not going to be able to pull out all these names in my head, but there's a nutritionist who wrote a book called Digestive Wellness.
Mm.
And she gave a talk that was amazing. Oh, Elizabeth Lipensky is her
Okay.
name. And Elizabeth had worked with autistic kids,
Hmm.
and I was blown away. The other person at that conference was Scott Shaban, who's a integrative psychologist, and he wrote several books, Don't Label My Child. But I guess those are two people right off the top of my head where I was just like, whoa, this was just so exciting. I think I
Mm.
was excited to go into medicine. I wanted to help people. And then I felt like I got into medicine and everybody is exhausted and burnt out and not really that joyful anymore. These doctors were happy, they were curious, and they were excited for youngish looking people to be excited about what they were excited about. It was just like the Claritin commercial where someone takes the film off. That was what my life felt like. And then when you go back to the conventional space, well, I can't unlearn this new stuff I just learned. How do I put all this in? It was AIHM was the beginning. And then once you start learning about this space, then I found IFM, which was a lot of biochemistry, which made me feel really safe. IFM is Institute for Functional Medicine.
Right.
And then you just keep learning, right? I think that's the thing that is exciting to me. Like, I'm a gynecologist and I went to integrated medicine and mental health, and I will probably go to some version of that meeting every year because what happens when your hormones change, right? PMS, perimenopause, postpartum, we have mood symptoms, right? Even though it's like quote unquote outside of my area, it's totally not outside my area. All those silos start to break down. You can't learn everything, and you certainly have to know when to ask for help. The world got a lot bigger medically, and that was exciting. And then it's also just such a pleasure to work with people that are inspiring and passionate about what they do and not burn out and exhausted and grouchy.
I love that. Is a really interesting. I'm almost thinking of Dorothy, right? For the Kansas to Oz, right? The black and white to full color kind of thing. But I'm guessing that you had to almost go back to school to learn a new way to practice medicine. Is that right?
So I did the IFM certification. It took me about 2 years. And I think that's the tip of the iceberg. So I think that I still do 2 to 3 times more CME than I'm required to do because everything is constantly changing and we're always learning, right?
Right.
I'm a nerd, right?
There it is.
I own that. I enjoy learning. I want to do the best I can for people. I can't learn everything. So when people come in with like the 500-page genetic report, I'm like, okay, I'm not a geneticist. I have to get help for this. But I think the learning never stops.
Yeah.
And hopefully we all stay curious. Hopefully we all stay engaged. Hopefully we always want to get better. We always want to do better. When I stop doing that, then I should stop practicing medicine.
Sure. Another one of the themes that really is consistent among these conversations is the concept of should. And for so many years in our lives, we're doing all of the things that we should be doing. And many of us, most of us, a lot of us are ruled by should, right? We do more what we should than what we actually want to do. For some people, it's parents delivering the shoulds, whether implicit or explicit. It could just be society and culture. It could be any of a number of influences in our lives. I'm interested in understanding from you, you are a practicing OB-GYN MD in a very conventional medical setting and surrounding. Were you getting a lot of pushback from people in that world as you started to explore and be attracted to this other world?
Good question.
I'll
Um,
let you think for a minute because as I was saying it, it's almost to me like another thing that we hear a lot around midlife is the concept of a spiritual awakening, right? And people opening themselves up to whatever kind of spiritual practice or theories or whatever is calling or resonates with them. And again, from people who aren't open to that or awake to that, there's a lot of that kind of like pulling back. Keep me comfortable by keeping you where I know you. I'm
mm,
curious professionally if there was any of that as you started to move. It sounds like you actually had a friend you were exploring this with.
yeah, so she left the practice I was at about a year and a half before I did.
Mm,
We were in different financial situations, so I really needed my income. I didn't have a whole lot of flexibility financially to just not make money for a certain amount of time when I was gonna start over again. I think that helped. I think the group I was working with, they didn't like really scold me. Patients really liked me. My schedule was really full. I wasn't doing anything like crazy and outlandish. And then how much holistic medicine can you practice in 12 minutes? Like, not much. You just don't have enough time. It was just time to go. And I wish I had gone sooner, right?
mm,
I think about the shoulds for me. I should deliver babies. I have 8 years of postgraduate training. I should do surgery. I stopped doing those things 4 years after training. That was financially not awesome,
yeah.
but for my heart, for my family, just like anything, like my area of focus is menopause. You can't be amazing at surgery, an amazing high risk obstetrician, an amazing primary care doc, an amazing endocrinologist. Like, you can't do it all. It made a lot of sense for me to just really dive into what I felt good about. I hear you with the shoulds. I probably stayed put for too long because I felt like I was scared. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
scared.
When we
And
first chatted, you said it did take you a while to gin up the courage to make the
mhm,
leap.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How old were
Mm.
you? Do you remember when you made the leap, when you left conventional medicine and kind of
Yeah, so
put
I
up
founded
your
Hormone Wellness MD in 2019, January of 2019, so mid-40s.
so mid-40s? Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So it's interesting because this transition for you is really 35 to 45. It was pretty much the whole decade. It was a slow burn and you had to follow your nose in a bunch of different ways. Some people I talk to have a very sort of discreet and clearly defined transition.
Mm.
I didn't. Mine was years and years long. And it's interesting to yours was as well. Yours was a long transition.
Yeah, I had to get a lot more training and then be in a place where I could open a business, but my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the reasons that you didn't do it sooner were totally practical and tactical.
Yeah, we could say that. I think the more honest answer is that I was also really scared, right?
Okay.
What if this doesn't work? How are we gonna pay the mortgage? Those are real concerns, right?
Big
So,
time.
yeah.
But I'm liking that you're saying and admitting to it wasn't just how to pay the mortgage. It was also like, actually, this is terrifying to
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
you never set out to be a business owner. You set
right.
out to be a doctor.
Exactly, and with no formal, like, business training, and I think I should say this, I had my own business once before, and it did not necessarily go well.
Mm.
When I stopped delivering babies, I had my own business for 2.5 years and then had a baby in that time, so I had 2 kids under 2, was trying to run my own business, and I had a second job at NC State in student health to pay the mortgage. It was so hard. I do not recommend that to anyone, ever. Nope. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was really scary to try it again. I'm really grateful to my husband that he was like, "I believe in you. You got this." Because it was so hard the first time around. This was much easier. Having kids that were older was a lot easier. And then
Sure.
I will just say I have 2 boys and they're freaking awesome. I was like, "Okay, mom's gonna do this thing, and that means everybody's gonna help out." I'm really grateful because I'm not a mother who makes their children's lunch.
Mhm.
When they're in the 1st grade, they learn how to make their own lunch. Come on.
Yep.
And they do their own laundry, and I wanna raise functional adults, so I'm grateful for them. They really stepped up.
Yeah. I am also a small business owner and I started my business, it'll be just about 19 years ago. And my threshold was very low.
Mm,
I felt like the tightrope I was walking was about 6 inches off the ground. I owned a condo, so I had a mortgage, but it was little. My nut was really little. And all I needed to go into business were a mobile phone and a computer and some internet connection. And if things were tight and groceries were tight, I would just go to my parents' house for dinner or accompany my mother to the grocery store and throw some things in the carriage, right? And this is in my mid-30s, but eh, the bar for me was very low. And then over time, it did go much further from the ground. But now I feel like I'm a professional tightrope walker and the height doesn't bother me because I grew with it. My skills
mhm.
grew with my distance from the ground. But for you, I think that it was probably a bit of a bigger commitment to start a business.
Sure. Absolutely. And then if you build it, will they come? Will
Yeah.
people pay cash out of pocket? They have insurance. I don't take insurance. Will that really land? And it did, and I'm grateful for that. I'm really grateful that I get to have time with patients and that there's time to explore more complex issues, and I'm not working for your insurance company. So if I wanna order some test, I order the test I wanna order, and if they're not covered by insurance, then we can talk about that, but I'm working for the patient, and that's who I wanna be working for.
Yeah, I'm very accustomed to that conversation. We're gonna send you for these 7 tests. It's only gonna be $1,500. Let's back up a couple steps and talk about that.
Right.
Hi. We'll get back to the conversation in just a minute. If you've been listening for a while, you know that there's a theme that keeps resurfacing. People who built beautiful, impressive, responsible lives and then woke up sometime around age 40 and realized they weren't sure who they'd built it for. People pleasing shows up in so many of these stories that I created something for you. It's a free guide called From People Pleasing to Peace. It's built from the stories of 14 of my past guests who each faced their people pleasing patterns and did the brave work of untangling it. People pleasing is a protective pattern, not a personality flaw. And once you understand it, you can begin to loosen its grip on your life. Get it at thebig40.com/peoplepleaser. And I'll put that link in the show notes for you as well. All right, back to the show. So tell me a little bit about where you are on the other side of this transition, right? You started the business, you're practicing in a way that's more fulfilling to you, that's more joyful for you, that makes you happier. And your business is a few years old now. So tell me a little bit about what life looks like differently now than 15 years ago.
Yeah, we've been open since January of 2019 and we've grown. I have a nurse practitioner and about 5 employees. So that's great. and probably have some room to grow some more. I work less than I did then.
Mhm.
A big part of me doing what I'm doing is taking good care of myself, right?
Ooh.
And I exercise and I prepare healthy food for my family or myself, and I listen to my nervous system. And all that is a privilege. So I don't want to sound like, and I'm acknowledging that I have privilege that I'm able to do that. But I do think that there are a lot of women that are entertaining busy for busy's sake. And I think our time and attention is our most precious resource. And so I'm trying to be really deliberate about how I'm using that resource. And then I think it's also a real privilege that I get to spend time learning about things that I want to learn about. And then now I have a podcast. My podcast is called Menopause Rescue. So I can share things that I'm learning and meet interesting people. So life feels pretty good. This next phase is I'm kind of looking at empty nest. One just went to college and one is a junior. And I don't know, I'm really diving in. I'm taking a pottery class and I suck at it.
Yeah.
That's also really good for me to try to do things that I'm not good at and learning new things that have nothing to do with medicine. So it's on Tuesday nights and I spend 3 hours playing in the dirt. Right.
Yep.
And there are no phones in there. And there are a lot of different people that I wouldn't normally hang out with, which is
Mhm.
awesome. I don't know. I'm excited for this next chapter because I'm finally, like, you see, if the 40s are like, figure it out, the 50s are like, I don't know about this whole I don't care movement. I think we do really care about what we care about. And
Right.
because we care about what we care about, the rest can fall away, right?
Yes.
Instead of framing it negatively, I would frame it positively. I really do care about what's important to me, and the rest is noise. And I can walk away from that.
I love that. I would probably add to that. One of the things about the transition is that we really come into ourselves. And again, as we
Mhm.
shed all of those shoulds and all of the things that other people want us to do and all of the measurements that other people are putting upon us, eh, the more we are true to ourselves, the more we don't care about what you care about. So that we do not care movement that's picking up steam right now. Yeah, it's not about not just giving a shit. It's about really utilizing our attention and our care for the things that are important to us and not necessarily important to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's an exciting time. I think menopause is the second adolescence, right?
Yes.
So the first adolescence, we separate from our parents.
Mhm.
And I don't mean to sound negative anyway, but I feel like as an individual, we separate a little bit from our families, right? We're no longer wiping noses and wiping bottoms, and we have time to take a pottery class or volunteer at whatever we want to do.
Right.
I don't know. It feels good to have a little bit of space.
Yeah, a little bit of independence and a little bit of your own identity. That's another thing that gets brought up a lot. So these things are just you. They're not necessarily in the context of other people. These things you're
Yeah.
getting to do now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's awesome to do things that are not performative, right? Like, I think a lot of us that are like very type A, we've been very driven, we were judged all the way through to create something and kind of separate from what the end product is, but just to experience I get to play in the mud for 3 hours. Who cares if I make anything or not, right? If
Yeah.
it all crashes out at the end or it blows up in the kiln, whatever. I got to play in the mud for 3 hours. That was great.
Yeah. The thing that I have found, I've done a couple of those different pursuits over the last 15 years. The first one I took up was aerial circus,
Oh,
which
fun.
was a blast and absolutely ridiculous because I was like 10 or 15 years older and 75 pounds more than most of the other girls in the room. But I didn't care because it was so much fun.
Mhm.
And the thing that I loved about that in particular was it required 100% of my attention, if not more, in order for me to be successful, but also safe in what I was doing. And so as a business owner, it was a wonderful thing to be like, I cannot think of anything else right this minute. Nothing can creep into my head. None of the
Right.
drama, none of the work stuff, none of the client stuff. None of it can creep into my head, or I will end up on my head on the ground. So I can imagine with pottery, it's similar, right? There's this structural integrity you're trying to figure out. You really have to be present and be there in order to create what you're hoping to create.
And there's this surrender maybe with both of those things, right? So I'll hear myself like, don't force the clay. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, here I am. Here's type A Polly. She's showing up. She's trying to push it through. I'm like, nope, you got to let that girl go. She's worn out. If
It-
we're just going to let the clay spin around, what's going to happen? Like, what is going to tell you what it needs to do? Just stop pushing it, right?
Same as a 44-year-old woman looking at the next silks over and seeing a 22-year-old. I love, there's that meme about 22-year-olds working out and some grizzled lady our age saying, not impressive, honey. When I was 22, I was running around in heels, eating French fries and smoking
Right.
cigarettes and drinking booze. Like, you don't
And I
impress
looked
me.
great then too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Like the comparison, you just have to, there is no comparison. You literally have to put it away because otherwise you will lose the joy in the thing that's you're doing to bring yourself joy. Yeah.
Mhm.
One thing I don't normally do, but I feel like I have a wonderful opportunity with you here. I have a small group of girlfriends that we all stay in contact via one of these apps. And they're all a little bit younger than me, but they're starting to talk a little bit about menopause. And I think it's a subject that is becoming more in the forefront in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years than it was when you or I were entering the journey, and certainly
Right.
when your mom or my mom were entering the journey. So,
Right.
talk a little bit about, from a 30,000-foot view, what do you want women in their mid to late 30s, early 40s, what do you want them to know about menopause? And not necessarily from a like practical, tactical point of view, see your doctor and advocate for yourself, but more like from that 30,000-foot view. Tell me a little bit about menopause.
Mm. I think we could go back to that idea of surrendering, right? What I mean by that is the women that I work with that are the most successful are approaching this transition with interest and curiosity. And they're open-minded, they have a growth mindset, and they're willing to try new things.
Mhm.
And so where I see people get stuck is they're like, I'm doing all the things. I'm going to the gym and it's still not working. And your body is going to change. It's puberty in reverse. It kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But on the other side, or even like through that process, you do get to this strength that you didn't know that you had. And you have to advocate for yourself in a way that you maybe never have before. And you can show up in your own life with so much more intention than you did before because everything now becomes very deliberate.
Mm.
If you can get curious rather than frustrated, and then you're doing that aerial yoga with the silks and you're suspending your body and all of those things, and you're so in your own space, right? Eyes on your own mat kind of thing, that the 22-year-old falls away because you have so much wisdom and so much more agency than that 22-year-old. She just falls away. We're not looking at her anymore. That would be my advice, to be really open-minded and curious, and also discernment. I think there's a lot of crap out there, right?
Mm.
Everybody wants to sell you something on social media for this supplement or that hair growth product or this thing that's gonna suck away your fat or da 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 da. Turn it off, go outside, listen to the birds, exercise, grow some food, connect
Yeah.
with someone you love. I think my biggest takeaway would be if we could approach this with curiosity and wonder and excitement rather than dread and foreboding, I think we would do real well.
Yeah. That's a great overview. I love that. One last question. This one's a personal one for one of my girlfriends, and it's a little specific, but Can you just talk again briefly, 10,000-foot view, about the outdated science around hormone replacement?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so there's a really great podcast Rachel Rubin and Peter Attia did. It's 2.5 hours. It's on YouTube, and Dr. Rubin did a fantastic job really debunking the WHI. But very quickly, so the Women's Health Initiative study, the WHI looked at one formulation of hormone replacement therapy. It was called Prempro, which was conjugated equine estrogen, so pregnant horse pea urine estrogen in an oral form, and a synthetic progestogen called medroxyprogesterone acetate. Those are not modern formulations of hormone replacement therapy. So, in that study, they initially said that there were about 3 more women out of 1,000 over 5 years that had a slight bump in breast cancer. If we go back and look, the control group probably was underreporting breast cancer, or because they've been on hormones before, they were actually at lower risk. And so that inflated the risk artificially in the treatment group. And it may actually be statistical noise. Okay. So this whole drama around hormones give you breast cancer. Okay. That just probably isn't true. Meanwhile, we're dumping poison in our water and in our food, and we're putting endocrine disrupting chemicals all over our bodies every day. But it's the hormone replacement therapy that's the problem. I'm sorry, but this is just one more way to keep women down. Sorry, it's just garbage. So typically, we are using a transdermal estradiol, so bioidentical, body equivalent, however you want to call it. I think people are kind of moving forward. Natural hormone therapy is a term to indicate that we're not using pregnant horse urine. You're not a horse. Great. Transdermal estradiol, oral micronized progesterone, or vaginal micronized progesterone. Fun fact, progesterone cream does not absorb through your skin enough to protect your uterus. You can give yourself uterine lining cancer by taking sufficient estrogen and not balancing it with enough progesterone if you have a uterus. I don't want to sound disrespectful or unkind to any of the many breast cancer survivors out
Right.
there. We are not trying to minimize your experience or your disease. We're hoping to look at whole women. So the rates of death between women who took hormone replacement therapy and the rates of death from breast cancer of women who didn't are the same. Okay. So if you have a hip fracture in the United States, your chances of being dead in the next 12 months are 30%. A third of people die who break their hip. Okay. That's huge. So we're trying to shift the conversation to treating women like boobs on a stick as a whole person. You have a
Mhm.
brain, you have a heart, you have a skeleton, you have quality of life, you have a mood, you have a libido, you have energy, you have all these things that hormones can be really helpful for.
Mhm.
And when people say hormones do X, your first step is to say, what hormones were used? How were they delivered? How long were they? How many people were in this study? How old were the people in the study? You need to ask more questions. You should
Right.
never accept hormones do X. Which hormones? In
Right.
whom? Okay.
And that can be said, actually, that same argument, I was having that same argument with a colleague earlier today who was saying that all of the, I won't even say what it was, but it was like, all of these things give you cancer. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's kind of outdated. And was your partner looking at an actual study, or were they just reading a news story sensationalized that picked a certain piece,
Right.
cherry picked? So, being that, what's the word I'm looking for? Educated consumer. Being that
Yeah.
educated consumer and thoughtful about what kind of information you're ingesting and what those sources are.
Yeah, Estrogen Matters is a really good book.
Mm.
I think I would point people in that direction, but we're living too long, right? When people are like, it's menopause is natural. I'm like, yeah, so is dying of sepsis, right? If it was all natural and we didn't have sanitation and we didn't have antibiotics and we didn't have pasteurization and we didn't have all of these things that have happened to keep us alive so much longer in such a shorter amount of time, naturally we would be dead by now. That's what's natural. And I want to live with a strong skeleton and without heart disease. Heart disease
Yep.
kills, it's the most common cause of death in the United States.
Yeah.
And I want to know who my loved ones are and have my brain working. Yeah, I'm taking hormones. I've been on hormones since I was 40. I will never stop.
I love that. Thank you so much, Polly. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being so generous with your story. And then thank you for letting me pick your professional brain about something that a lot of us are either about to head into or are sailing the seas of or coming out the other side of. So I really appreciate everything you've shared with me today.
Well, this was so fun, Stephanie. I hope you have a great day and thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening today. Don't you love it when people don't let themselves off the hook, even when you give them a perfectly good out? When Polly and I were talking about the reason it took her so long to start her medical practice, I suggested that there were practical and tactical reasons, like paying a mortgage, that held her back. But she didn't take the bait, and I love it. She womaned up and owned the hard truth. She was scared. And that may be one of the most important things she said in this entire episode. And it would be easy to sort of chasse beyond it, because the practical and tactical reasons were not a cop out. The mortgage was real. The financial pressure she faced was real. But also, she was intellectually ready to leave for years before she actually did it. And the gap between knowing and going was fear and not logistics. So maybe, now that I've pointed that out, this could be something that you recognize in your own life. And I'm sure you have some absolutely 100% valid reasons for not making a change or taking a chance. But if you were being honest like Polly, it's not the whole reason, is it? And it's hard to be honest enough with yourself to admit that kind of fear. Most people don't name the fear at all. They just keep reworking that practical excuse until it's airtight and they are fully convinced. But Polly's story is a wonderful illustration of a theme that keeps coming up when doing everything right stops working. And Polly did everything right by every available measure. She got her degrees, she did extensive training, she followed a career path, she worked within the system. And then she arrived at age 35, feeling like she was an insurance clerk more than a physician. This is a textbook case of the doing everything right framework not producing what it promised. So once she realized she wasn't on the path she intended or expected to be on, and she acknowledged that it really wasn't feeling fulfilling to her, she started exploring adjacent paths to see if any of those could be a better fit. And she found one, but it was scary. Learning to distinguish between a genuine obstacle and a comfortable reason to stay put is the nuance. Again, she had perfectly defensible reasons to stay put, and it's easy to hide behind those, which draws in another one of our recurring themes, the lure of pretty good. Pretty good is seductive precisely because it's defensible. Polly talked about how she stopped doing surgeries and delivering babies only 4 years after she finished training, even though she had spent 8 years of postgraduate education telling her that she should be doing those things. And this is kind of a deeper insight into that same problem. It's not just the fear of the leap. It's the difficulty of leaving something you've worked so hard to build, something that looks completely fine, maybe even enviable from the outside. And nobody is telling you to leave it. But the should is internal and it's loud. And the longer you've invested in a path, the harder it is to admit that the path has run out for you specifically, even if it's still working for everyone else around you or looks good to the audience in your life. And the danger of a life that looks fine but does not feel right is arguably the backbone of her entire story. Polly's schedule was full. Her patients liked her. Nobody was scolding her, telling her to do something else. From the outside, everything looked like it was working. But that's precisely what made it so hard to leave and so easy to rationalize staying. Because how do you explain leaving something that looks completely fine to everyone else? But Polly at least acknowledged that there was something more and that she was scared. And that's a tough thing to do in our society. How often is it okay for us to be scared or unsure? But admitting that fear opens up another path for exploration should we be so bold. The opportunity to identify what it is that fear might be protecting. Because that fear that hides behind mortgages and very, very good reasons not to do something is almost never just about the thing that it says that it's about. It's often protecting something deeper. Could be an identity, could be a self-image, could be a story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what your life means. For Polly, she didn't just have a job, she had 8 years of postgraduate training. She was a doctor, specifically the kind of doctor that delivers babies and does surgery. So leaving that wasn't just a career change. It was a renegotiation of who she was. So the fear might have been, what if this new business fails? Or what if I can't help pay the mortgage? But it wasn't only that. The fear was also, what if I'm not who I thought I was? Or even, what if all of that work I did didn't mean what I thought it did? Polly's transition took a full decade. And although she said her only regret was not doing it sooner, I think it is important to point out that she didn't do nothing during that decade. She was following the thread. The decade wasn't a delay. It was the actual process of figuring out what was next. She went to that supplements conference. She found AIHM. She did the 2-year IFM certification. She stayed in the conventional practice while she was becoming someone who could eventually leave it. That was actually the transition happening, even if it didn't look like much of a transition from the outside. Because I hate to say it, but the messy middle is often the work, not just the waiting room for what's next. All right, next time you'll meet MJ, who always wanted to be an investigator and never got the chance until her 40s handed her the most personal cold case you could imagine. Can't wait to share that one with you. I'll see you next time. The Big 4-0 podcast is produced and presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.